Hi, I'm Dr. Cari Keebaugh, and along with Dr. Kara Kaufman, I'm one of the co-founders of the LS Squared Liberal Arts Lecture Series at North Shore Community College. This series is designed to promote dialogue about topics relevant to the liberal arts disciplines. It's a forum for the exchange and dissemination of ideas, a place to celebrate faculty projects and research, and a way to reach out and share our work with both the NSCC family and the broader community of which the college is part. We've obviously gone virtual this year, but we want to keep the spirit of community alive. So if you have any questions or comments about this lecture, please feel free to write them into the Google Doc that is available in the link next to this video. And please be on the lookout this spring for our next lecture, Women and War by Wanda Potier Hill. Today, I'm going to be presenting my presentation called Pink or Blue? Sleeping Beauty in Popular Culture. Much better. As I was saying, pink and blue. Sleeping Beauty in popular culture. Whatever color you prefer her gown, Princess Aurora has been dancing her way into fans' hearts since she first appeared in A Technicolor Dream in 1959. But making Disney Studios' 40th film and their Sweet 16th animated feature wasn't as easy as, waving a magic wand. The production team faced thorny animation issues, delays incurred by other projects, though not Magic Slumber, and their very own dragon, in the guise of mixed critical reception immediately following the film's release. In fact, the film did so poorly that Sleeping Beauty would be the last animated fairy tale that Disney Studios produced for nearly 30 years, before the studio dipped their toe back into fairy tale waters with The Little Mermaid in 1989. Now, in the climactic scene, the three good fairies and Prince Philip vanquish Maleficent the dragon in a dramatic blaze of green and black fire, but critics of the film would not be quite so easily silenced. Renewed interest in Disney films and a surge of feminist critiques peaking in the late 1990s would overshadow the film's successes for years. Sleeping Beauty has been declared crude, the least progressive of early Disney films, and my personal favorite, a poor imitation of a Disney film. But such criticisms are in sharp contrast with the awards and accolades the film has earned. In 2019, the Library of Congress placed Sleeping Beauty on the National Film Registry for being a work of enduring importance to American culture. So, which is it? Pink? Blue? Pink and blue? An artfully designed masterpiece, a milestone in pop culture? Or a dumpster fire of a film? I believe Sleeping Beauty is in fact a milestone in pop culture, but its importance is often overlooked due in part to the academic zeitgeist in the late 90s and early to mid 2000s against all things Disney, and particularly against Disney princess films. But the echoes of critics' cries from the 90s that the film is anti-feminist betray an incomplete view of the project, and ultimately distract from the film's contributions to filmmaking and pop culture more broadly. Besides being a deceptively feminist story, Sleeping Beauty changed the landscape of animation as well as the literal landscape of public spaces, and continues to impact popular culture today. So let's hack through the thorns of criticism to discover what exactly Sleeping Beauty is all about. Of course, the first and most popular criticism of any Disney princess film is going to be that the princess is too passive. This trend can be traced back to Marsha Lieberman's seminal article, Someday My Prince Will Come, where she warns that fairy tales are a, quote, primary channel of acculturation, and that they teach girls to be submissive, passive victims. She doesn't actually target Walt Disney specifically, just the studio's choice of subject matter. She seems more upset that Disney's stories are popular. But numerous studies picked up her battle cry in the years to follow with such colorful and dramatic titles as Damsels in Distress, The Shattered Slipper Project, and of course, Breaking the Disney Spell. Articles like these typically posit that Disney princesses are universally helpless, submissive, pale and pathetic, helpless ornaments, and barely alive automatons who exist only to be rescued by and then married off to men. But recent studies, like Do Rosario's, suggest that ending up with the prince isn't the message in Disney films. She points out that the housekeeping is imposed upon early Disney princesses, and it becomes apparent that she's merely concealed behind this inherited drudgery, waiting to be revealed in new form. Perhaps even more compelling, linguists Fraught and Eisenhower recently dispelled the notion that princesses were mere ornaments, having proven that women speak more in the three early princess movies than men do. Sleeping Beauty comes in at the highest percentage. According to their research, women speak 71% of the dialogue in the movie. The movie is actually routinely criticized for only giving 18 lines to Aurora, but viewers have to remember that there are other women present in the film. Like, you know, them and one of the most popular villains of all time. Just saying. In an interesting perspective shift, Gill claims that Disney princesses aren't passive at all, and that the blame lies with the rhetoric used in reviews. She states that princesses display equally masculine and feminine traits, but reviews only ever focus on the times female characters behave in a stereotypically feminine way, such as the sequences with the three good fairies. But many reviewers over the years have pointed out that the fairies hate pretending to be homemakers, and they drop the guise of domestic life as soon as possible. Not that any reviewers ever point to that moment. While Disney's princesses may indeed often end their adventures in marriage, or, at least going steady, Randall points out that compared to the historically masculine fairy tale traditions of the late 18th and early 19th century, Disney's princesses actually follow a 17th century tradition, where women were the ones holding the pens. She notes, often, Walt's heroines, though less physically active, eclipse the princes in character dimension, and they're always allowed to show personal preference for their suitors, which Walt Disney did quite intentionally with both Snow White and Aurora. Unfortunately, I don't have time to expand on Snow White here, but if you want to pop any questions into that Google Doc, I would be happy to talk about Snow White. Or you can always send me an email too. So, the debate rages merrily on. Did Aurora fall asleep on the job as a feminist icon, so to speak, or do the critics have it wrong? While I find arguments for Aurora's progressive nature to be pretty compelling, one viewer's damsel in distress is another's hero. So instead, let's set aside that debate for the moment and look to the creation of the film itself. What did Walt and his team want to accomplish with Aurora? As it turns out, Walt Disney did not want his Sleeping Beauty to just be a somnambulant symbol of compliance. Mary Costa, the actor who gave Aurora her voice, has given several interviews where she sheds light on Disney's intentions for the princess. Disney instructed her to, quote, know Briar Rose so well that you actually become her. How does she feel about her godmothers and living in the forest? How does she feel about the many shades of green in the trees and shrubs and the different colors of the flowers? Does she laugh and cry with her godmothers? And while many contemporary critics grumble that Aurora has the fewest line of any Disney princesses, blah, 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 none of which happen after she's woken from her cursed sleep, Costa remembers the effort that went into every single syllable and the multiple, quote-unquote, painstaking sessions where she had to return to the recording studio to re-record a phrase or scene to make the nuance just right. Costa also reminisces about the planning sessions she would have with Disney 2 or 3 times every week, deliberately done on the phone because, quote, Walt Disney didn't want to be influenced by my personality and person, end quote. First and foremost, Disney knew what he wanted Aurora to sound like. The film was very nearly tabled for years because he couldn't find a voice he liked. That is, until he found Costa. He was so pleased with her sound that he urged her to take every precaution to preserve her vocal cords, ending every phone conversation with, and don't catch a cold. In these phone conversations, Disney guided Costa through many of the vagaries of the character. She worked hard at developing Aurora, including her accent and her mannerisms, which Aurora's animator, Mark Davis, would then replicate in many of her scenes. Disney required Costa to approach the character as a human, complex, layered character, and when she had questions about Aurora, he encouraged her to seek out lead animator Mark Davis for answers. Through Disney's guidance and Davis's advice, Costa used her voice to create a subtle, complicated character. She remembers an event during which she was asked about her work on Sleeping Beauty, to which Mark Davis famously replied for her, "The voices were the ocean of sound upon which we animated." And this actually brings me to my second point. Even if you aren't convinced that Sleeping Beauty has a feminist message, you still have to admit that it literally changed the shape of modern animation. What Costa colored with her voice, animators would color with color. It was a collaboration that would result in a very lifelike rendering of the princess, more human than any other Disney character to that date. Aurora's iconic look was the result of collaboration between animators Ivan Earl and Mark Davis. Walt Disney insisted that in this film, animators, quote, make the characters as real as possible, near flesh and blood, end quote. To achieve this realism and to give Sleeping Beauty the look of a moving illustration, as Disney called it, Disney gave the role of production designer to Ivan Earl. Earl and his team looked to many sources as inspiration for Sleeping Beauty, but it would be layout artist John Hench who would hit upon the style that carried the story. After a trip to the Met Cloisters in New York, Hench realized that the artistic style of the famous unicorn tapestries he saw there would be perfectly adapted to an animated feature. They have crisp edges, he said of the illustrations in the tapestries. The planes are not defined very well, except for a kind of superimposition for distance, which might translate perfectly for animation. Earl was equally drawn to this aesthetic, specifically works of Jan van Eyck and the Très Riche Arts de Jean. And after adding his own touch to the style by straightening the curves, Earl approached Walt Disney with some concept paintings. Disney took one look at the concept art, full of verdant foliage and angular structures, and said, "Okay, that's it. Everybody, follow Ivan." But Earl's sharp lines and exquisite detail required extra work from the animators, as Sleeping Beauty was still using the traditional hand-inked cell method of animation, although it would be the last the studio made that way before they shifted to the new technology, Xerox. Quality control animator Iwa Takamoto, who worked on Aurora, recalled that, quote, in between artists, the artists who filled in the sequences of movement between the drawings done by the lead animators, were lucky to finish a mere 6 or 7 drawings per day, end quote. My research suggests that it's closer, you usually average closer 30 or 40 drawings a day. But it demanded as much, or even more work, from Earl. He created roughly 60 enormous works of art, some reaching up to 15 feet long, painstakingly detailed, to serve as backgrounds. This level of detail outshines even that of Fantasia, and it hasn't been achieved to this degree since. But change always creates growing pains. Not only did Earl's highly stylized vision create more work for the in-betweeners, but even the lead animators had to rethink their character designs. Quote, the old-fashioned Disney characters did not look good over my backgrounds, end quote, Earl said. The rounded cartoon shapes the animators utilized in their character sketches for Aurora, so tried and true in Snow White and Cinderella, just didn't mesh with Earl's lush linear backgrounds, and the backgrounds didn't fade behind the characters as in previous animated films. Here, characters and backgrounds work together to tell the story. So although Earl was guided by historic, medieval tapestries, the approach he brought to Sleeping Beauty was modern and required reinventing new methods of animation. So, to fix the problem, animators stylized the characters, and in particular, Aurora, setting her apart from her princess predecessors. Animator Mark Davis remembers, quote, we were faced with the challenge of finding a girl who was different from Snow White, Cinderella, Alice, and other heroines we had, end quote. If you take a close look at Aurora here, you'll notice her original design is sharper than that of Snow or Cindy, and that her hair rolls in an Art Deco-inspired curls, and the pleats of her day dress contain straight lines. Her hair and her straight lines in her gown are both meant to work in harmony with Earl's backgrounds. Maleficent's design also follows this logic. Note the roundest characters are the fairies, and as magical beings, it was deemed acceptable for them to stand apart in this subtle kind of way. Thus, the film serves as a bridge between old and new animation techniques. While it was the last Disney film to use hand-inked cells, it was the first to feature a bold new style full of detailed backgrounds and angular figures, which are still in use today in many cases. And even the colors in Sleeping Beauty had to be reinvented, like the challenge that they faced originally coloring Snow White, which required the use of real cheek rouge to get her healthy glow. You can actually see it there on her cheeks. Animators had to invent new colors to bring Sleeping Beauty to life. The bright hues required the Disney Paint Lab to play with new additives that would make the colors radiant on screen, producing glowing jewel tones never before seen in animation. Disney told sequence director Eric Larson that, quote, he didn't care how long it took but do it right, end quote. Well, it took 6 years, 300 animators, 60 fully realized backgrounds that were standalone works of art, and $6 million to do it right. But Sleeping Beauty has left a lasting impression on the field of animation. Modern animators still look to Earl's work on Sleeping Beauty to inform current projects. Maleficent's movements were heavily influential for the animation of Jafar in Aladdin, and animator Randy Haycock, who animated The Princess and the Frog's Prince Naveen, as well as Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, remembers being inspired by the natural but stylized movements of the characters in Sleeping Beauty. Production designer Mike Giamo has given presentations about how Earl's designs informed both Pocahontas and Frozen. Pocahontas' signature hair owes a debt to Aura's locks, according to animator Glenn Keane, while in Frozen, Giamo notes that the long, linear Earl style of animating backgrounds allows the animators to use more detailed patterns, especially in costumes, making the overall effect architectural, elegant, and realistic. Pixar director Pete Docter even described how animators used Earl's backgrounds from Sleeping Beauty to help create the lush landscapes for Up. Quote, most of the photos I took of the South American jungles for Up are just a mess. You can't really tell what's foreground and what's background. Something we referenced from Earl's work is how light defines where detail is. End quote. And I also harbor a pet suspicion that Bucky from The Emperor's New Groove is a direct ancestor of the squirrels in Sleeping Beauty, although I have no proof, no quotes from any animators to back that up, but look at his tail. His tail is just... Bucky has to be a product of that. But animation isn't actually the only landscape that Sleeping Beauty would change forever. Part of the reason Sleeping Beauty took a full 6 years to make is because the work necessarily slowed as Walt and many of his right-hand men refocused their attentions on the upcoming theme park opening. The top priorities were Disneyland and the television shows, Earl recalled years later. Then, whenever you could, back to Sleeping Beauty. Even in the park, Aurora would leave her mark in the form of an iconic centerpiece of Disneyland, Sleeping Beauty's castle. Plans for including a castle in the park were tenuous at first, although a castle appears as a central component in Herb Ryman's original sketch for the park. This was drawn hastily in a single weekend with Walt's direct input and supervision. But the castle would go through many iterations before it would take the shape as the Sleeping Beauty castle we know and love today. In fact, some early park designs featured no castle at all. But Walt was adamant. He understood that people needed a sight line, a visual marker, or, as he called it, a weenie, to encourage guests to move down Main Street towards the heart of his park, what some theme park theorists now call wayfinding or guest wayfinding. Disney called such visual anchors weenies not only because he loved hot dogs, but because every evening when he got home from the Disneyland build site, he would lead his dog Duchess around the house by enticing her with one. So this idea of leading people where you were hoping they would go came from his dog Duchess's love of hot dogs. And so a castle was built to help guide guests down the street and to the park's central hub. To promote the then-in-progress film, the castle was dedicated to Aurora. Every theme park since then, every Disney park since then, has featured a castle in its central hub as the park's visual weenie, and other parks around the world have also adopted this practice. Even shopping malls make use of this principle now by the use of anchor stores. And the man credited with designing the modern shopping mall, Victor Gruen, included Disneyland in his seminal text, The Heart of Our Cities, in 1964. Modern museums often make use of weenies to help orient and direct visitors. For example, the National Air and Space Museum. Grocery stores even use a variation on this concept by putting the most commonly purchased items in the very back of the store to get guests wayfinding to the back. But there are subtler places that the influence of Sleeping Beauty Castle appears. I was surprised and absolutely delighted to learn that video game programmers are taught to code weenies into their games. So in game design, a weenie is a way to, quote, highly increase the chances of a gamer following the programmer's set out path. This gives the game designer more control in crafting an ideal experience for the gamer, especially useful in open world games or larger game spaces in a more linear game, end quote. Some places where where this can be particularly helpful includes helping gamers locate NPCs or non-player characters, coded characters who they have to find and interact with, helps them find interactive items or side quests, and can provide a place for teams in MMORPGs to gather or help alleviate the burden of lengthy scripted cutscenes and sequences. So, pink and blue, Sleeping Beauty has garnered a reputation as being a boring Disney film featuring an anti-feminist icon who has nothing to say to the sophisticated modern viewer. But linguistic analysis, careful study of the creation of the film, and evidence of Sleeping Beauty's impact on modern animation, architecture, and even video games tells another story. She may be Sleeping Beauty, but her impact on pop culture is far more significant and lasting than just a dream. Thank you.